Welcome to IdeaMix Performance and Wellness, where world-leading coaches and scientists explain how their research can help you achieve your personal and professional goals faster.
Talia, from my own perspective, as the mother of 3 children between college and middle school age, I'm very struck by the limited amount of time we have as parents to really work with our children. And there's a window of opportunity, it feels like, where we can help them to build resilience. So I wanted to start with, what do we mean when we talk about resilience in children? Would you please define it for us?
Yeah, when we're talking about resilience, and I know that this word gets thrown around a lot, and really all it is all of our ability to trust ourselves to do the next right thing. If we're going through a hard time and, we see kids now that the minute things get hard, they'll sort of drop what they're drawing, or they won't continue reading, or they'll, shut down at school, or they'll walk off the field in soccer. And what we're talking about when we talk about resilience is the ability to see something go wrong and say, okay, what do I do next? And do that next. And that requires a lot of deep trust in ourselves and our ability to handle hard things. So resilience is your belief in your ability to handle hard things and your ability to do the next best thing and the next best thing and the next best thing and the next best thing, until you're okay again.
It's such a continuum. I watched, I don't know if anybody else did, but I watched Boys on the Boat over the weekend, and it was such a great story, first of all, and a great film, so really worth watching. But it was all about resilience, right? And surviving through a tough time in the world, but also a tough set of circumstances that they were confronting individually. And part of it, of course, revolves around education, which is a great segue into, you previously worked as an educator. What made you focus on resilience and start coaching parents and children on this topic?
Yeah, I was a teacher, and then I was a literacy coach, and I traveled around the country working with large urban schools and small rural schools and private schools and public schools and suburban schools and all schools around the country. And really what I saw, and what I think every teacher would agree with, is that kids who are having a hard time in school, the kids who make it better are the kids who have resilience, the kids who are willing to try again, even if they think they might get it wrong. And that is regardless of the topic, regardless of why they're having a hard time. You can't make somebody learn. You learn because you want to learn. And the way that you get through it and get better is by trying again when it's hard. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about resilience. And I saw in schools that there's a lot of great teachers in this country, and they're working really hard to help kids build up their trust in themselves. But they have a curriculum to teach. There's 28 kids in the room, 16 to 35 kids in the room. And really they're not able to go as deep as parents can. Parents, we're with our kids year after year, and we're with our kids for much more than, just the 8 hours a day of in-school work. And so I started really, as a supplement to my work in schools with teachers, to work with parents on helping their kids develop that trust in themselves, that they can try again, develop their frustration tolerance, develop their confidence. And then it became sort of what I'm doing full time, because the work was just so impactful and so powerful. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that background. I think it's really useful in helping people, all of us who are here today, sort of understand the context a little bit. And I always think about this question, Talia, as I'm sure you do, which is, for so many people, it's not always clear what the difference is between coaching and therapy. And especially when it comes to this topic of resilience and our children, many times the first reaction is to send them to therapy, which in some cases is absolutely effective. Tell us a little bit about your thinking on when coaching is more effective versus when therapy is the right option.
Yes. Thank you for asking that. It's a really big, there is a very big difference. So therapy for kids is and can be extremely impactful, as you said. Really what it is focused on the individual child and helping the individual child get more comfortable with themselves and slowly develop an understanding of their emotions and when emotions come up, what to do with them, and how to cope. And all of that is really important and really important skill building. With my background as a teacher, what I noticed, and those of us on here, it's likely that we follow, like, there's a lot of like therapists on Instagram sharing a lot of good stuff like that I love. I mean, I love Dr. Becky, I love Big Little Feelings. There's all these sites that are amazing and doing great work talking about how to help your one kid. For a lot of us, there's more than just one parent and one child in a household. And so where a teacher's perspective comes in, and what I do in my coaching is really to think about the entire family dynamic and how does your kid fit into the whole family dynamic, and how are we helping your kids get along, and how are we helping your kids develop trust in themselves and in others? How are you helping your relationship with your kids? How are you helping if you have a spouse or a co-parent? How are you helping them develop their relationship with your kids? And so there's like 8 different relationships happening, in a 4-person household that really do need to be taken into account. And so in my coaching practice, what I talk to parents about is that we're working on the foundation for the kid. If you picture your kid inside of like a playhouse, we're working on making sure the roof isn't leaking, making sure the walls aren't drafty, making sure that it smells good, that the rug is soft, that it feels good surrounding your kids. And in therapy, it's really about, inside out. It's really about helping somebody pull out what they need. And coaching is much more direct. It's really like what I have is a system and a curriculum that we teach to help kids develop this internal resilience, but it is a step-by-step process that I guide folks through. And so that is very different, very different from therapy. And usually I have parents who start with me thinking that they might send their kid to therapy after. And what I see is that a lot of the time there's not a need for that once the family systems and structures are strengthened.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I get asked this question with frequency in trying to explain to people the difference between coaching and therapy. And maybe the easiest way that I explain it is that therapy tends really to want to look inwards and in the past, whereas coaching really tends to look at something from a very practical perspective and looks forward. And, often I think people sort of understand it through that difference in addition to the really great explanation you just provided.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Talia, for years, whenever my children said they wanted something because everyone else had it, which is an often confronted problem by parents, my response used to be, well, it's different in our family. And so that's sort of how it is. And so as an example, I, tried to delay giving my children phones for as long as possible. But there did come a point where everyone around them had one. And so as a parent, you sort of, at that moment, are like questioning your own decision, right? And is it time to change? School is such a huge part of our children's lives and such a big influence. The teachers, the students, all of it, right? Apart from parenting. Would you share with us some of your observations on school life for the average kid and how it's actually impacting their resilience?
Yeah. If we talk about resilience as trusting yourself, because there has to be a level of trust there in order to take the next action. And the way that school is built, and I've been in most of them, and the way that school is built right now is really about promoting perfectionism a lot of the time, perfectionism is what gets in the way of our own resilience. If we're like, oh my God, I didn't get it right the first time, that means that I'm bad. That means that I'm never going to get it. That means, that'll get in the way of us taking the next action. And waiting for the next action to be perfect. And what happens in school is, teacher asks a question, you raise your hand to answer, and you don't get the answer right. No big deal. The teacher just moves on to the next person, right? In recess, like you're trying to kick the ball into goal at soccer, and you get one shot, you kick the ball, and then you go to the back of the line, and it's not your turn anymore until your turn comes up again. And so the way that school is built, because there are so many kids, right, and so many competing interests, you have one shot to get it right. You have the one quiz, right? And then it's over. And then you either got it or you didn't get it. And we know that that's not how the world works, right? We know that we all have more than one opportunity usually to get something right. If we're learning how to do something, we have a lot of chances to figure it out and get it not quite right and submit it, even if it is at 85%, and still have it be done, right? And so schools right now are not, it's not that individual teachers don't want to promote resilience and help kids overcome their perfectionism and help kids get less nervous about trying something new. And it's not that they don't want to, they really do. And actually, it's like one of the main things that when I go speak at PTA is, it's one of the main things that principals tell me is like, our kids need to get over this perfectionism thing and get more comfortable making mistakes. But that's not going to actually happen in the school environment just because of the logistics, not because of the desire. And so that's where we really have to pivot into our home environment and think about how are we talking about mistakes at home, not how are we talking about our kids' mistakes, because we're all so sweet. Everybody on this call is so sweet to their kids when they make a mistake, right? It's like, oh, sweetie, you didn't get it. It's okay. We all make mistakes sometimes. I made a mistake last week. When that's fine. And that's beautiful thing to say to your kids. I'm talking about how are you responding to your mistakes and your spouse's mistakes, right? Because that's what kids learn. Is it's okay to make mistakes or it's not, because when my parent gets upset at my other parent for making a mistake, that's what's telling me that it's actually not okay, not what my parents telling me, because every single kid ages 3 and up has like a adult BS sensor, right? When it's like, you're just telling me this because I'm a kid, right? You're just telling me this because you want me to think this, not because it's true in your life. And our kids can tell what's true in our lives. So teachers have a big influence on kids, school has a big influence on kids, but really the biggest influence is about what is happening at home and how are we tackling these topics at home, because I'm telling you, it's not happening in schools as much as teachers wanted to, and as much as it probably definitely should be. Just logistically, it's very hard to help kids work on their confidence inside of a classroom setting.
I mean, two really key, I think, points that I'll just summarize from what you just said. One, the schooling system is sort of every stakeholder in the schooling system, the child, the parent, the teacher, the principal, is sort of trapped into this system of trying to measure performance simply by numbers, right? And so it's like, what was the test score and what was the average and how does that compare to the other class in the other school and the other district and to the national, et cetera. And so it's hard when those are the objective parameters of success, both for the children as well as the educators, to get away from perfectionism, right? Because you've sort of set an objective bar, it is one bar, and that centers around a score. And so then, that's what everyone orients towards, right? I think your second point on children absorb what they see us do, not what they hear us say, is super important. And it's so easy as a parent to forget that, because our own behaviors often don't mirror what we say to our children. And it's very clear which of those two messages actually goes across to them and embeds in their minds.
That's right. That's right. And we've heard that, a million times before, and we might think that we're doing something different. We might think like, oh, well, I wouldn't ever say this in front of them, and I hear that a lot of like, oh, well, I talk to myself this way, but I would never say that in front of them. And in in my curriculum, we actually spend the first while talking about ourselves and the way that we talk to ourselves and the way that we tell our own stories of resilience, and we mine our own stories, and we get into what is my own value system as a parent, and what is my mission statement as a parent. And that's because all of it starts with who we are, and our kids are going to absorb who we are and how we are, and not what we do or say. So,
yeah. And I think that's where the coaching work is so interesting, in that parents need coaching on bridging the inconsistency between the theory that they put out for their children and their own behaviors, right? And that is behavioral change. And behavioral change is always hard. And it requires a coach really unpacking those behaviors and the sort of why behind those behaviors, and then actually holding you accountable for changing those behaviors so that what you're saying is consistent with what you're doing.
that's right. That's right.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. You know, my children are a little older now. They're sort of between middle school and college age, but I remember feeling like such a distinct loss of control when they were really young, because as a parent, I felt like I was being constantly sort of led by or dictated to by their needs, right? And so it just felt frustrating at times. For the parents who are with us today, who are parents of young children, right? Sort of that 1 to 10 band, in terms of age, tell us how they should think about the importance of resilience, because it's a different discussion, right? And a different modality of how parents are interacting with their children in the 1 to 10 phase versus, let's call it, the 10 to 20 phase.
That's exactly it. And really the 1 to 10 phase, as I'm sure is no surprise, there's just much more opportunity. Kids are still developing the parts of their brain that talk to them about themselves. The research shows that by age 8, if you think that you're bad at math at age 8, you think that you're bad at math at age 40. And the reverse is true too. If you think that you're good at something by age 8, you think that you're good at something by age 40. And so what we're talking about when we talk about trust in ourselves, which is the foundation of resilience, we can help our little kids develop that at under 10 much faster, at a much faster rate. And it takes less time because of how old they are and because of how influenced they are by their parents. I mean, anyone with a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old can see that those 2 years, 10 to 12, you start to slowly lose some of your influence. And we'll talk about older kids too, because it's not all done after age 10. But really for the younger kids, what we start off with after we've kind of crafted a mission statement, is we really do work on how do we create the conditions at home for kids to have the opportunity to fail privately and pivot. And why failing privately? Because like if I'm cooking in my kitchen and I know that my husband could see me, he's a better cook than I am, by a long shot. He's going to have an opinion about what I'm doing. And even if he's like on his phone and not doing anything much, and even if he's not really paying attention to me, I'm probably not going to get too experimental because I know that he could see me. And so if I'm alone in the kitchen, I might get more experimental. And even if everything goes wrong, I'm going to have to pivot and maybe make another meal or maybe throw it away and get takeout. And I get to decide what I do with my failure. And so failing privately is and we do that through developing an independent play practice. We do that through creating roles in the house that kids take on, like think about chores, but a bigger umbrella of like, who am I in the household and how do I contribute to the household? And, those things can be done privately. And so for kids to not feel observed, because our little kids today are so much more observed than any other generation of humans, since humankind started about 40,000 years ago. So really the opportunities for little kids is to give them a little bit of space to make the next best decision when something goes wrong.
So you said something really interesting in there that I want you to say more on, please, which is this generation of children is the most watched set of children in the world. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, what we do is let's picture it, right? Let's picture it. Our kids now, we usually drop them off at school, right? It's not like they walk to school, although kids 20 years ago, ages 7, 8, 9, 10 were often walking to school, but we drop them off.
Yep.
We pick them up from school, and then we make sure that there's an adult who takes them to their after school activity. They're in their after school activity. So even if they're playing, they're playing soccer one day, they're playing piano the other day, they're playing tennis the next day, they're playing chess the next day. Even if we put the word playing in front of it, they're still being guided by an adult in a game, right? That's the same.
Always a supervised, structured activity. That's what you're saying.
Always a supervised, structured activity. And there's always an adult to go to when something goes wrong. And what advice do we give our kids if someone's being mean to them or they fall down or something happens? Is go find a teacher, go tell an adult. And so we're not giving them time to figure out what to do next, because they're always able to go like this. Okay, what do I do now? Okay, what's next? And by allowing them to always have someone to turn to, and to always be watched, we're taking away the opportunity for them to really develop that trust in themselves. And I'm saying this, but you need after school care, right? Like, we're all here. I'm not saying pull your kids out of their after school programs, but what I am saying is to use the time before and after dinner time, and to use the weekends, the time that we actually are with our kids, to develop some of these practices, because they won't happen in an after school environment, and they won't happen during school for the most part.
That makes a lot of sense. So every time, Talia, that I talk to my friends who have older children, and I say, I feel like my parenting window is closing with my youngest child now in 7th grade, they laugh and they sort of say to me, well, this generation of kids keeps coming back, right? They're more attached to us as parents than previous generations, certainly than we were to our parents.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, as parents, obviously, it's a lifelong responsibility towards our children, but there are fewer moments as they get older to provide the input, right? That 10 to 20 phase, but then beyond that as well. For the parents who are with us today, with teens, with older kids, what should they start thinking about to build greater resilience in their children?
Yeah, I love this question, because I have a lot of parents of teens who come to me too, and they're like, I know it's probably too late, but, and the truth is, anyone here with a parent, who's living knows you're in a relationship with your parents for the rest of your lives. You are. And so what we talk about with teens, it does look different. It actually looks more like, you holding, there's a phrase that's like, I'll hold your confidence, I'll hold your trust. And so if our teen doesn't have a lot of self-trust, or they're very influenced by their peers, or they've got a lot of, like, they're trying to people please and I saw a comment, to that effect, what we could do is show them how we see them. And even if it's not exactly how we see them, but how we think they could be, we show them how we see them, and we hold their self-trust for them. So that looks like, what we work on in the program after we create the right conditions is we build our kids' capacity. And when we're building our kids' capacity, we're saying things like, okay, whether or not you did your homework tonight, you're going to school tomorrow, I'm going to trust you this week to do all of your homework. I'm not going to check it. And then you actually have to hold that trust and not check it. And then what happens to their grades, and what happens if they don't hand in their homework for a week, and is that the end of the world or not? And only your kid's school, and if that's okay or not. And if it's not homework, we'll find something else. But really to hold trust for kids so that they don't feel as watched, because by the time they're 12, 13, 14, 16, 18, they know what things are like in their house. And if you're really trying to make a change and trying to help them develop self-trust, it's going to take some time for them to trust you, that you trust them. It just takes a little bit longer, and it requires a little bit more intention and a little bit more actually sitting on your hands to get there.
It's such a fantastic point, because it's also the way that children learn to make mistakes and take ownership and take responsibility for their own outcomes, right? Because when you're constantly monitored by a parent or a homework helper or whatever it is, but an adult basically who's guiding you in terms of what to do, and you haven't had to figure it out for yourself, there's no opportunity in a sense to make a mistake, right? Because the guardrails are always there, and it's sort of hard to fall off the wagon. And I think when kids are given that opportunity by adults, by, as you said, us holding their trust so that they can go off and fall down and get back up and reflect on that and figure out what they need to do differently, that is an incredibly powerful tool to build their resilience.
Yes, absolutely. And that's true for kids of all ages, but it's especially true for our tweens and teens who know, like you can't fool them. So they know if you mean it or not, and they're going to find out if you mean it or not, because they're going to try for, a while to get around whatever it is that you're saying until they see that you mean it. So
yeah, makes a ton of sense. So, I'm going to go to a couple of questions that we have here in the audience. One question from an audience member is that our culture is fairly punitive and judgmental, right? And our children realize that, they recognize that, all of us, I'm sure, have heard from our children of late that they feel hesitation in expressing themselves freely and openly in their school settings because they don't want to be judged, or they feel there's something they can't say, or whatever the sort of environment is. How do you feel we as parents can address that, right? Because in a sense, we're all kind of living against the backdrop of a social fabric that has become frayed, a set of views that have become incredibly polarized, and a sort of loss of civility in the way that people express themselves. How do you think we can help our children through that?
Yeah. I'll answer this in a sort of more at a higher level.
Yeah.
Because really what we're asking is there's two parts of this. One is, how do we all, as parents, parenting in public, and as kids, being kids in public, how do we navigate when we are going against something that is considered the social norm? That's one part of it. And then the other part of it is, how do we help ourselves and our kids solve their own how do we help our kids and guide our kids to solve problems in public? And because that's really what it is. It's okay, I'm not doing this the way that somebody else would. Is that okay with me or not? Do I feel watched or not? Is it okay with me that I'm being watched or not? And those are the kinds of questions that we're all assessing anytime that comes up. And so when we talk about building our kids' capacity, which is the last component of the curriculum that I teach, we're really talking about how do we help our kids solve problems in a way that is true to them? And how do we help our kids solve problems knowing, and we do a lot of work of what are my kids' strengths and how do I help them use their strengths to solve problems? If we have a kid who's like pretty shy and not very assertive, but we have a parent, which I see a lot, we have a parent who's like gotten by being pretty assertive, that parent's advice, because it works for them, might be, well, stick up for yourself next time. I'll help you practice how to stick up for yourself. If your friend says something rude to you, next time you say, you can't talk to me like that, and you might give them some advice of how to stick up for themselves. And I've gone through this with several parents, and they're like, well, I gave them the advice and we practiced it, and then even the next day they came back and they were like, the same thing happened and I did not stick up for myself. And so what we talk about there is, who is your kid? If your kid's a little bit shy, but they're super kind and really empathetic and a good listener and kind of funny, then maybe it's not about sticking up for themselves in public. Maybe we can help them solve their problem by going to that person in private, by writing them a note, by thinking about what works for our specific kid. And how do we help them learn that when I have a problem, I have strengths inside of me that help me solve that problem, and not when I have a problem, I have to go learn a new skill in order to start solving that problem. Because when we're talking about self-trust, there has to be a level of, okay, I'm just going to act right now, instead of I have to go and ask and figure it out and learn something new, and then I'll come back to figure this out, you know? So really that's the second piece of it, is how do we help our kids solve problems? And that is by knowing their strengths and knowing who they are and knowing what might work for them, which is usually and might be different from how we would solve a problem. And then the first part of, you know, it's just such a punitive culture right now, and kids are mean to each other and parents are really mean to each other, and there's a lot of judgment around. And that's why I think that the work at home is so important, because even when you're at the playground, you know, or, you know, out picking your kid up after school, you can feel really judged as a parent, and your kid can feel really watched by their peers. But in the confines of your four walls, it can feel really freeing and really different. And that's where we start, so that by the time you are out in public making a choice, like I have parents of 7 and 8-year-olds in New York City who, you know, let their kid go down to the bodega on the corner and buy bread or buy seltzer. And I see you shaking your head, Sam. And,
Oh, no, no,
and
no. I'm just like so supportive of that. But
yeah,
I know a lot of parents who would not be in the city.
exactly. And so by the time we're up to that, we've done so much work to develop so much confidence in yourself, in your kids. You've seen their capacity, you've seen their strengths, you know that they can handle it, that part becomes just so much less of an issue, because you've developed those skills pretty much in private, right? In the confines of your own home, before you take them out into the world.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Another question we have is, if you could provide some advice, tactics on how to help young children, sort of 0 to 10, learn to trust themselves and learn to trust their instincts. You know, they're surrounded by whatever the peer group is at school. Often you know, that peer group has whatever set of expectations it has. And you sometimes see as a parent a dichotomy in your child between they're perfectly fine at expressing and working with boundaries at home, less so when it comes to their peer group because they're trying to please.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about your advice on that front.
Yeah, we work a lot on developing those inner strengths at home that they can then kind of strut out onto this, you know, take with them out in public. It's for a lot of kids who are okay with setting boundaries at home, okay with saying no at home, really clear about what they want at home, who don't do that in school. Or, you know, with their peer group, that's a really strong indication that they're borrowing your trust, that they trust themselves because they're at home and they feel comfortable and they know, and they're really comfortable with you. So I want to say first that that's amazing. You know, how wonderful that your kid feels free to express themselves at home. That's a really big win. And the way that we build up self-trust is not by starting with a peer group, right? It's by continuing that self-trust at home, and practicing some of those situations. So usually the reason all of us who have met people out in the world, not just kids, you know, but the reason why we're a little bit more deferential or we're more eager to please is because we're not really sure where and how we fit in, right, in the group. And that's true for humans, not just kids. And so something that we really focus on in the work that I do is about who is your child, the one child that you're thinking of, you know, several usually, who is that child inside of the family dynamic, and what's their role? And not what's their role. Oh yeah, they're the troublemaker. They're the one who has trouble in school. They're the one who doesn't go to bed when I tell them. They're the one who freaks out over every little thing. They're the one who ruined dinner last night. You know, not that role, but what is their positive contributing role in the household? Are they the funny one? Can they tell a joke before dinner? Are they the one who likes for things to be, you know, fair? Can they distribute dessert? Are they the one, you know, who likes for things to be neat? Can they help fold or put away the laundry? Like, what is their actual role? Not what are their chores, but who are they in the household? Because they have a role already. All of us who grew up in a family know that there are just roles, that you take on. But how can we help them develop a positive role at home? And then they're able to take that positive image more easily into unclear and unsure social situations where they're not sure what their role is, because they're able to be like, well, I'm someone who's really organized. I can help figure out, the next play date or where we want to go. Or I'm someone who's really funny. I'm going to tell a joke right now, because they have that image of themselves from the home.
Yeah, that's so true. So I want to shift gears a little bit again. There's a steady stream of research on childhood resilience, anxiety, depression, the rising rates of mental health issues. We're sort of almost bombarded right now by them, right? Tell us about a couple of the pieces of research that we as parents should actually focus on and think about. And then we'll get into like, how can we apply them at home?
Yeah, there's really interesting research coming out. First of all, I mean, we've gone this whole time without talking about screens, and we can have like a whole separate, webinar on screens and screen use. But we do know that screens affect our own mental health and our kids' mental health very dramatically. And we don't know what that looks like on the long term, research wise, because it's just hasn't been long enough. But we know that short term it does. But there's really interesting positive research coming out. There's several therapists who have kind of published together on this idea of an anxiety reducing therapy that so as adults, we might do something if we have a lot of anxiety about, let's say, spiders. We might do something called exposure therapy, which is, one day you're in a room with a spider, then the next day the spider's nearer to you, and then the next day you might look at it, you might touch the tank, and then the fourth day you might touch it. That's a version of exposure therapy.
Sort of a gradual
Gradual
acclimatization.
exposure to the thing that you're scared of.
Yeah.
And that does not work for kids, because you're not going to convince a 6-year-old who's scared of spiders to go near the spider, right? The adult is like, I need to do this, I need to do it. And so I'm going to try hard. And the kid is like, get me away from the spider. So exposure therapy doesn't really work that well for kids. What does work, and what the research is showing, is this version of independence therapy that shows that, and I see this, I mean, I'm not a researcher, but I just see this anecdotally in my practice all of the time, that shows that kids who have independent tasks in a totally separate area then develop confidence in the area that they're anxious about, without touching the area that they're anxious about. So if you're having a lot of trouble getting your kid into school, that's why a lot of kids go to therapy. There's a lot of kids in therapy because they're like dreading going to school and hate going to school, and there's big fights every morning. And for those kids, what the parent does is in independence therapy, and actually, in a lot of what I teach and what a lot of others teach, is how can we get them to do something on their own that they like? So do they want to walk the dog after school? Are they asking if they could bike ride to their friend's house and we don't yet feel comfortable? Can we get them like washing the car on the weekend? Like, is there something that they want to do that they could figure out how to do from start to finish, that they do on their own? And again, it's this question of failing privately, right? If something goes wrong and they're on their own, they have to figure out what's next. And actually, that independence in a totally separate area, very positively, the research now shows, very positively impacts what you're anxious about in the first place without needing to touch it. And that's really promising for kids. And that also just does go to show that like a lot of our anxiety that our kids are experiencing, and we are in, epidemic levels of childhood anxiety right now, diagnosed and undiagnosed, it really does have to do with how little independence our kids have. And when we're very purposeful about, again, bite-sized amounts of independence, not totally rehauling our lives and moving out into the country and never sending our kid to school, but bite-sized amounts of independence in ways that are realistic for those of us who have jobs and have other things going on, can really, really reverse that.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really, it's a great point on enabling them to actually experience that independence and develop confidence in their own problem solving skills. So last question, Talia, before you wrap up. I know this is a topic on a lot of this group's minds. how does one know as a parent when it's time to reach out for help? What's normal versus what requires intervention from a coach like you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so there's two categories that I would look at, outside of, is this, because a lot of parents come to me, they're like, is this normal? Yeah, is this okay? And aside from that, which we all want to know the answer to that, and usually the answer is it depends. But aside from that, what I look for is this impacting your kids' conversations with themselves? Like, are they talking badly about themselves? Right? Are they like, I'm going to be bad at this. I'm so bad at this. I'm terrible at, are they talking badly about themselves? Because
Sort of negative self-talk, basically.
negative self-talk. And we know, and as we talked about earlier, by age 8, that becomes more fixed, but it's malleable. I mean, for the rest of your life, with gradual levels of how hard it is, to change, but it is malleable. And so how are they talking about themselves? And if they're talking negatively about themselves now, whatever now is, ages 3, age 16, age 22, if they're talking negatively about themselves now, it will only spiral. And the second part is it impacting their place in the household? Is it to a point where their siblings are annoyed with them, you're annoyed with them, your spouse, if you have a spouse, is annoyed with them? Is it impacting the way you see them and how you're interacting with them, and how their siblings who know, what's going on are interacting with them? There's a question here about internal negative self-talk. And yes, of course, that's trickier to detect, but it's, there are ways of figuring out, like, you can ask your kids. I mean, often when I'm doing an intake with parents, I'm like, how does your kid talk about themselves? And they might say what they're good at, like, oh, well, they would say they're great at art and they're great at dance and they, love this show and that they love reading. But what I look for when kids talk about themselves is, I'm a really good friend. I'm really good at problem solving, or I'm a really funny kid. I've got a lot of personality. What are the personality traits that they feel they have and their levels of strength that they feel they have, and not how good are you at soccer, and so that's really what we look for, is, do they know their own strengths?
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Talia, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. You can learn more about Coach Talia at our website. There's also a webinar, or actually more of a workshop, which will be much more interactive than this, coming up on February 29th. So please join us for that. Sign-ups in the chat. And thanks for being here with us today. And Talia, thank you.
Thank you. This is great talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe wherever you listen and leave us a review. Find your ideal coach at www.theideamix.com. Special thanks to our producer, Martin Maluski, and singer-songwriter Doug Allen.